Four People, One Street, and an album that changed music forever. You've seen the image, but what is the story behind it? Today, we're delving into how the Beatles created Abbey Road, the album that feels like the perfect goodbye, even though it technically wasn't. By 1969, the Beatles weren't exactly the tight knit group that they'd once were. Years of non stop fame, creative disagreements, and business problems had taken their toll. Their previous project, the sessions which eventually became Let It Be, had been tense and chaotic, and for the first time it seemed possible that the band might actually not survive. But despite everything, they did agree on one thing. If they were going to make another album, they wanted to do it properly, with care, with polish, and with longtime producer George Martin guiding them. So they returned to a familiar place, and that was, of course, Abbey Road Studios in London. 1. Recording began in early 1969, and the atmosphere was surprisingly focused. While personal relationships were still complicated, the band shared a sense that this might be their last chance to create something truly special and indeed timeless. Technologically, the studio had upgraded to an 8-track recorder. Yes, 8 tracks in a recording studio. That was pretty groundbreaking, actually, giving them more freedom than ever before. This allowed for the album to have layered harmonies, complex arrangements, and indeed intricate production techniques that defined the sound of this album, which is surprisingly different. Songs like Come Together, brought a laid back groove, while Something, of course, showcased George Harrison's growing ability and skill as a songwriter, proving that he could easily stand alongside the Titans as they were at the time of Lennon and McCartney, of course. But one of the album's most groundbreaking ideas comes on side two, a medley of shorter songs blended into one continuous piece. Fragments that might have been unfinished on their own were stitched together into one long musical journey, that becomes sort of an adventure. You got themes that appear, themes that disappear, then they return, creating a sense of closure. It really is an incredible piece of art. It feels almost cinematic, like the final act of a film, building towards really what is an apt ending line. And in the end, the love you take is equal to the love you make. So, it fits so perfectly well because it's not just a lyric, it is like, or feels like, a farewell message. One. Now, about that album cover, the idea was refreshingly simple: step outside of the recording studio and take a photo on the zebra crossing. Photographer Ian McMillan had just minutes to capture the shot, briefly helped by a police officer stopping traffic. And of course, out of several, photos, one stood out, perfectly balanced and perfectly timed. No band name, of course, no band title, just purely and simply the image. And it became, of course, one of the most recognizable covers in history, turning the street outside the studio into a global landmark. And of course, to some degree, a shrine to the Beatles, really, honestly. Um, but what makes Abbey Road so powerful, it's not just the music, it's the feeling that it generates. There's a sense of maturity throughout the album. The songwriting both reflects optimism and reflection, as if the band knew they were closing a chapter, completely. You can hear, playfulness, nostalgia, and sort of a quiet acceptance of their fate. Even though they didn't announce a breakup at the time, the album feels like a curtain call, a final bow from the biggest band in the world at that time, and probably even now, really, to a certain degree, I would say. More than 5 decades later, Abbey Road is still shaping music. Artists across rock and pop and indie, cite the album as an influence, not just for its songs, but for its production and indeed its scale of ambition. The cover's been recreated countless times. The medley format inspired concept albums, and the studio itself remains a pilgrimage site. Sorry, I put my teeth in for music fans, including myself. It's proof that great art really doesn't just reflect its time. It keeps evolving, and every generation that discovers it. Abbey Road isn't just an album, it's a snapshot of creativity at its peak. Four musicians coming together for one last time to make something not only special, but indeed timeless. And maybe that's why it still resonates today, because it reminds us that even endings can actually sometimes be beautiful. Anyway, if you enjoyed this deep dive into Abbey Road, hit like and subscribe. And tell me in the comments, what's your favourite track on Abbey Road? I gotta be honest, I find that quite difficult because there are some pretty good standout moments, even on the medley of songs. Yeah, it's a pretty clever album. Anyway, thanks for watching. Take care.